Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Aaron Dusk, aka The Literate Beast, or The Illiterate Beast, depending on how many haters I end up getting after this video. I'm an indie author with 2 published books, The Mark of Amuli and The Varcross Key, which was recently released. For those of you that have somehow wandered into this channel without really knowing what I write, I'm gonna enlighten you in the most subtle and tasteful way I know how. Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. Anyways, in this video, I wanted to answer some more questions about publication and why I chose the self-publishing route, as well as if I'll stick to one form or another, or maybe go hybrid in the future. If you're a reader who's curious about the process, or a writer who's interested in going down the published author route, I might be able to offer some insight. So one of the questions I get in regards to publication is, can't you just submit your book to a publisher? And the answer to that is no, and I'll explain why. So one, you can't just submit something directly to a publisher without representation from a literary agent. And two, publishers often want first rights to a book, which means it shouldn't be published anywhere else online. So as with anything in the industry, there are exceptions, and those are exceptionally rare exceptions. So yes, the self-published author breaks out and has a large following, sells thousands, tens of thousands of copies, then yeah, a publisher might want to sign that author or at least take note of the author, and there wouldn't be any kind of agent required for that. Agents are there as a means for publishers to get filtered submissions, if that makes any sense. So it means, the agents are selecting potential authors that have something they can actually sell to the publisher. Another question I often get is why I chose self-publishing route over the traditional self-publishing route, and what are the upsides and downsides to both. So that's mainly what this video is going to be about, is taking what I know about traditional publishing and self-publishing and my experience with both of them. Now, keep in mind, I don't have full experience with the traditional publishing route, aside from submitting to agents and communicating with literary agents. For that, there are really good author tubers out there that have this information. One of them, one of the traditional published authors that I follow is Alexa Dunn. She actually, she knows a lot about the traditional publishing. She's done it. That's basically all of her career. So, there are lots of author tubers out there, but I would recommend giving, if you're really interested in the traditional route and what it takes to actually become a traditional author, then just go and go look at her videos. So, as I mentioned earlier, traditional publishing is very tightly gatekept by literary agents. A lot of people don't know this, but I did query the Mark of Amuli before self-publishing. And after the 4th query letter, I actually got a full manuscript request. That's kind of rare in traditional publishing. Usually, you have to submit to many agents before you get a bite. I got really lucky in that regard. I got one on my well, I should say lucky/unlucky, because I'll explain that in a second. Anyways, the agent was very interested in the story, but this was also where I started to become a little disillusioned with the process of traditional publishing. For one, the agent told me that I would have a better shot selling the manuscript to a publisher if I changed some things, most notably Alex's gender. That kind of defeated the purpose of everything, but I respectfully declined and withdrew the submission, deciding, the path really wasn't worth pursuing for my first book. At least, that was my take on it. Sure, I could have queried more agents, and I had one bad agent, but it just left such a sour taste in my mouth that I decided to just go ahead and go down the self-publishing route. So that brings me to the pros and cons of both paths. So let's start with traditional first, the cons of traditional publishing. Traditional publishing follows trends. That should probably come as no surprise to a lot of people who have looked at Goodreads lately at any of the upcoming books or any of the newly released books, they kind of all have that same look to them. So in order for a query letter to have a better chance at not being rejected by a literary agent, you kind of have to know what the market is doing. Trends, they wax and wane, just like any other industry, and you need to know what's selling right now and what has fallen out of favor. If dystopian fiction, for example, was popular in the last 5 years, but steampunk has taken its place, for example, you're likely not going to be able to sell your Hunger Games knockoff like Veronica Roth did with Divergent. It's just not going to happen. You've got to stay with the trends. You've got to follow them. You've got to see what publishers are actually looking for. Chasing trends in publishing might be good for business, but at the same time, it's really bad for creativity and diversity in the industry. So, which kind of ties back into kind of everything being samey or same looking lately. So that's one thing you gotta keep in mind. I mean, chasing trends. A lot of traditionally published authors and even agents will say, "Don't chase the trends. Write what you want to write," but at the same time, tell you, "Well, what you have isn't really in the market right now. So try again when it becomes popular," which, it could be 5-10 years down the road. So it's kind of, if you want to go the traditional publishing route, you'll probably want to keep an eye on where the trends are going in the industry. Traditional publishing also has one set of rules for debut authors and another set for established bestsellers. A lot of people who start writing, who want to get into publishing, will say that the rules don't really apply to them, or somehow think that the rules don't apply to them, but they'll very quickly find out that they do in fact apply, especially after that 200th rejection from a literary agent. There's something wrong with something that you're doing. And debut authors are a risk. They're a risk to the publisher. Most don't make back the sales and what the book costs to produce. So if you haven't yet published, or your last published book didn't sell, you have to follow strict guidelines for manuscript submission. Depending on your genre, there will be word count requirements, and very few exceptions are made here. I mean, this is a hard, it's a very hard set rule. Even if you're submitting to a smaller publisher. They usually have word count requirements, and those are very strictly enforced word count requirements. So typically publishers will not accept a novel with a word count more than 100,000 words from a debut author. The more words, the higher the cost, the higher the risk. In fact, depending on the genre you write in, your word count can make or break your manuscript's chances of being accepted by an agent. So, for example, if your middle grade fantasy is 100,000 words long, your chances just get slimmer, because you not only have to take into account the genre that you're writing in, you have to take into account the audience that you're writing for as well. So, you're not going to find that many 6th and 7th graders who are reading like full-length novels. You need to tailor it to the attention span and, quite frankly, the reading capability of the audience that you're writing for. You have to do some research here. There are guidelines for each genre and for each age group as well, as far as word counts. Of course, if you're an author like Brandon Sanderson, for example, making millions for the publisher, you can write whatever the hell you want. You can write whatever the hell you want. You can have whatever word count you want. As any Brandon Sanderson reader would know, he takes full advantage of this with books that probably could be half the length and still get the point across. But anyways, I'm not going to go into that. Another con of traditional publishing is that it takes a lot of time. Not only do you need to query for agents, which can in itself take months, but that agent also has to sell your manuscript to an editor. That can take several months. That can take years to happen. And like I said, depending on where the marketing trends are now, an editor might not accept your manuscript might be great, but an editor might not accept it just because the trends aren't there right now. So, and then even after the manuscript is purchased, you'll likely have to do a lot of rewriting, a lot of revising, a lot of editing, which can be a source of frustration to a lot of writers. Even in self-publishing, you should be doing this, but you have more leeway than you would when dealing with a team of editors from the big four publications. Which leads me to the next con. You're going to be giving up some creative freedom if you go traditional publishing. That's something you've got to, if you're going to go down that route, you've got to put on your big boy pants or big girl pants, because you're going to have to give up some creative freedom. You're not going to be able to choose your own cover. Most traditionally published authors do not choose their own cover. They don't even see the cover. You at times won't even be able to pick the title. They will choose the title for you. The blurb is often written by someone else. So you're not going to have the choice to put what you want on the cover of the book. That is completely up to the publisher at that point, because you got to remember, the cover is the first source of marketing, okay? And publishers know how to market books. That's the whole industry. They sell books. So the covers have to fall within certain guidelines. The blurbs have to fall within certain guidelines. So there's really no leeway in that. If you're not willing to give up that kind of control, you might want to pursue a different path. Another con of traditional publishing is that it unsurprisingly does not pay very well. Royalties can range from 7% to 25%, with 25% being on the higher side of the royalty, which, when you're selling, hundreds of thousands or millions of copies, that's not a bad deal. But when you're selling, several hundred to 1,000 copies, it probably won't be enough to even make the advance back. And advances are usually what the publisher will pay the author to publish their book. And that has to be made up by royalties. So your book has to sell a certain amount of copies to make back what the publisher gave the author to publish that book. This brings me to the next point. Publishers don't offer a lot of marketing help, unless you're already a well-known author. If a publisher is advancing an author 6 figures, then yeah, they're going to market the shit out of that book to ensure it gets a return on the investment. But if you're a no-name debut, then you're kind of left sinking and swimming at that point. Don't get me wrong, there is help within the traditional publishing scope, but for the most part, you're going to be expected to do the majority of the marketing yourself. So you got to get some guidance, but for the most part, you're going to need to do your fair share of research on that. Finally, when you sign a contract, you're giving up a significant amount of your publishing rights for a book. So let's say that you write a book that you want to make into a series, but the first book doesn't sell very well. The publisher is likely not going to want another book in that series. So the problem then ends up being the publisher kind of holds the rights to that book for a certain amount of time. So if the term is not up and you want to self-publish the second part to that book, you're not going to be able to until the terms are up. Or if you can kind of talk the publisher into giving you the rights back to that book, which, fat chance of that happening. So I guess good luck at that point. Now for the pros of traditional publishing. There's absolutely no upfront cost, okay? Editing, printing, cover design, even the marketing to a certain extent is paid for by the publisher. And when I say marketing to a certain extent, usually it comes out of the advance that they give you for a marketing budget. So keep in mind that. But for the most part, unless it's a vanity press, there's no charging for any of this stuff. Now, vanity presses are a whole other topic. Vanity presses are scams. If you're paying any publisher to publish your book for you, then that is a vanity press, and you should probably not be doing that. But that of course is another conversation, and you can actually look up all kinds of information on vanity presses to see, if the person, because sometimes they'll actually actively reach out to indie authors to say, hey, we can make your book sell thousands, just have us publish your book, or have us give us the rights to help you market your book, or something like that. It usually ends up really hurting the author in the long run. So don't fall for the vanity presses. Another pro is your book will most likely be in bookstores. This is something that will likely not be the case with self-published authors, because publishers have sales reps that go out to these places to basically sell your book to these brick and mortar bookstores, and they only have a limited amount of space. So they're usually going to choose traditionally published books that have been vetted by agents, that have been professionally edited, and they know that the book is has a certain amount of quality to it. Another pro to traditional publishing is that you're not alone. Most writers only want to write and not have to worry about all the other stuff that comes along with publishing a book. So, as mentioned before, you'll be working with editors, art directors, proofreaders, and some of the people to help you with marketing. So you're not out on an island all by yourself as you would be, with traditionally published, with indie publishing. Another pro that comes with traditional publishing is prestige. Anyone can be a self-published author. That there is no gateway to entry here. You can literally copy the first draft of your Wattpad Twilight fanfic, change the character names, and upload it to Amazon and call yourself a published author. There's nothing more challenging about that. So when people think of self-published authors, they often think of that type of person who is just uploading their fanfic with the serial numbers filed off of it. But when you're traditionally published, you're actually considered legit. I know that's going to piss a lot of people off, because every wannabe author wants validation that they are in fact authors, when in reality that's not really the case. And I say this as a self-published author myself. Even though I've published my best work, I'm still not considered a legitimate author because I haven't been vetted by the traditional process, which is a lot more arduous than simply deciding yourself whether your book is ready. That's pretty much all there is to that. So there is a bit of prestige to being traditionally published and a bit of bragging rights that goes along with it. Having the name of one of the big four or their imprints on, like the inner cover of your book it signals to the readers that the book meets a certain quality that comes with traditional publishing. So, and finally, this is more vanity, more bragging rights, but you have much better shots at literary prizes when you're traditionally published. Indie authors are usually frozen out of this space. Even though nowadays, these rewards are starting to mean, or these awards are starting to mean less and less. But it's still nice to have a blurb like on your cover stating that you're a prestigious award-winning author and can actually back that up. So now for indie publishing, I'm going to get into the pros and cons of this one. So I'll start with the pros for indie publishing, just so that I'm not scaring too many people. You have complete creative control over everything. So everything from the blurb to the title to the book cover to the editing process, everything. Don't like the editor's suggestions? You don't have to take any of it. You want your first book to not be a standalone? No one's going to stop you. You can do anything you want, no matter how absurd or detrimental to your book sales. It's all you. It's all you at that point. So, next, you work on your own timeline. There are no deadlines. There are no contracts. There's no one's waiting for you, and you're not waiting for anyone else. There's also no querying process and no publisher to sell to, which greatly decreases the amount of time it takes for a story to go from an idea to actual print. So that's a big plus for a lot of people. It was also a plus to me too. So that's another thing. Next, there's no need to chase genre trends. You can also write in a niche, that traditional publishers might shy away from. So like, for instance, in my niche, although I don't know, my niche is starting to become more and more popular nowadays, so it may no longer be a niche. But traditionally published, self-publishing is kind of a way for readers to read things that they normally wouldn't be able to read in the traditionally published space. So that's why it's gotten so big over the last decade, is because you can find stories that you can't find anywhere else. You can also market as little or as much as you want without having to meet a sales quota or paying back an author advance. When I published The Mark of Amuli, I was marketing that book like constantly. I was marketing it, every single day because I wanted it as many hands as possible, basically. I made an investment I wanted to see pay off, but you also don't have to do that either. Some self-published authors just want to get their book in print so they can give it to their family or their friends. So you don't, just because somebody has, published a book, or has self-published a book, doesn't mean that they necessarily want to make a lot of money off of it or really care if it sells or not. Another reason why indie publishing may be right for you is because the rights are yours. You have all the rights, and you'll also make a larger percentage of the royalties per book sale. So for example, if your ebook is on KDP, you'll make 70% of the royalties off of it as compared to 7% or 25% you'd get from traditional publishing. Sounds great, doesn't it? Well, let's get to the cons of this route of publishing, and then I'll let you decide which way would make more sense to you. So, the first and foremost, and this is the reason a lot of people do not go into indie, or a lot of people that want to sell books don't go into indie publishing. And the first reason, there is a rather prohibitive upfront cost to this. So, if you want to sell, or if you want to create a book that actually sells, you're going to have to be putting down some big cash on it. And this means you have to pay thousands of dollars for editors. You have to pay for cover designers, marketing, ISBNs, copyrights, software like InDesign, purchasing professional templates if you're good at designing the book yourself. Or if you don't want to do that, then you have to pay someone to do your internal book design for you. You'll either need to create your own blurb, or you'll have to hire somebody to create the blurb if you're not really that good at them. If you also decide to do physical advance review copies, for example, before your book is released, you have to pay for those books up front, and then you have to also pay to ship those books out. So that's another huge upfront cost as well. If you want to include editorial reviews on your cover or website or Amazon page, you have to pay for those. Editorial reviews are not free, and now there's a big difference between editorial reviews and regular reviews. Editorial reviews are professional reviews. You have to pay for those. Regular reviews, you do not pay for those. In fact, that is kind of frowned upon and against a lot of rules if you pay people to review your book. Another con is that you have to do all the marketing yourself. And I mean all of it. Okay, so whereas traditional publishing, you still have to do the marketing yourself, but you actually have a team to help you market. With indie publishing, you're on your own. You're on your own island here. You have to do the research yourself. You have to put in the effort yourself. You have to not only keep up with social media, but you also have to hawk your books on blogs, YouTubers, forums, and you have to do all that without coming across as a spammer. So, which can get you, blocked. It can get you, it can get you banned, removed, or it can even get your book review bombed. So you don't want to do stuff like that. You want to kind of advertise your book naturally in these spaces. You also don't want to give unsolicited books or emails to YouTubers who are not asking for them at the time. So you need to keep a close eye on booktubers, especially who all of a sudden open up their emails to suggestions for books. So, but don't count on getting any kind of reply back. I think I maybe gotten a reply to like 3 of my queries to not only YouTubers but bloggers as well. So it's very tough to get into those spaces. You also need to learn how to utilize Amazon, Meta, BookBub, other places where you do pay-per-click advertising. If you don't learn how to do those properly, it'll end up costing you dearly, and you're not going to get what you pay for. So this is all, again, up to you, and to do research on that as well. I had to learn a lot of hard lessons here, so I had to do a lot of researching for myself to figure out what worked for my book. Another con is you'll likely not end up in bookstores. Brick and mortar bookstores, like I said before, they have very limited space. Okay, and traditional publishers usually occupy the majority of that space. So that's not to say that indie authors cannot get into bookstores. They do it all the time, but now you have to go from marketing to, you have to be now a sales rep. You have to be your own sales rep. So you don't have a team of sales reps going out and selling your book to these bookstores. You now have to do that yourself. This is probably starting to sound very intimidating to a lot of you writers out there. A lot of us are very introverted people, and the idea, I mean, even to me, the idea of going and selling my book to a brick and mortar store terrifies the shit out of me. So I've never done that before. I've never done a book signing either, because there's nothing more humiliating than scheduling a book signing and nobody show up. I mean, I could not imagine how absolutely embarrassing that would be, but it happens, and sometimes you have to put yourself out there. Sometimes you have to eat a little crow. You have to deal with a bit of embarrassment to succeed. And I mean, I've done other things besides that, and I've gotten kind of lucky in a lot of places too. So I can't exactly say I've never done it and I'm selling books. Well, not everybody, can go down the same routes as other people. What works for some people doesn't work for other people. Last, as mentioned before, traditional publishing, you're likely going to be able to receive some kind of accolades for your books. New York Times bestsellers are usually within the traditional publishing sphere. Like with anything, it's not impossible for this to happen, but don't hold your breath on that. And lastly, the royalties may be much better than traditional publishing, but it doesn't really mean much if you're not really selling any books. So unless you're some huge TikToker or YouTuber or some sort of social media star, chances of your first self-published book making a lot of sales is very slim, at least for the first couple years. In fact, your first 2 or 3 books might not land. But unlike traditional publishing and self-publishing, it's a numbers game. So the more books you have, the more likely you are to sell any one of them at any given time. It doesn't matter what the quality is. It's and as far as Amazon goes, and I hate to say this, it's quantity over quality, and you'll see that a lot with some of these self-published books, but they sell and it works. So there are self-published erotica authors, for example, right now making 6 figures, and I've actually seen them, and I've actually seen their YouTubes. I've seen them on their Reddits, and they are legit, because this is a very good way to make money. And they're utilizing the numbers game. So with erotica, quality as well as the word count is quite low. And readers kind of expect that. They're already expecting the quality to be, kind of on the shitty side, and it to be a quick read. It's supposed to be a quick and dirty read, okay? They're not reading the book for literary genius. They're reading the book usually to get off. So, erotica it's like that. So that's just the way it is. In fact, I write, erotica too, so I kind of know how the stories are written. So, that's not saying people who write erotica work less. In fact, a lot of people who do this work their asses off. Even to put out subpar quality, you have to produce a lot of it. Okay, so you're still writing a lot to make this kind of money in this sphere and to remain relevant and to remain up in the Amazon's selling ranking. So it's like search engine optimization. The more you have, the more likely, or the more, the more that's out there, the more places it's out there, the more likely people are going to stumble upon it. So if you're feeling masochistic enough to become an author, and you actually want to make a living off your books, the path you choose boils down to a few things. One being your financial situation. 2, how much time you have. Also, how far you're willing to step out of your comfort zone, and how much creativity you're willing to give up or keep. So those are things to keep in mind depending on which path you want to choose for a publication going forward. Also, both paths offer no guarantees of success. I want to point that out and make that very clear. Just because you're traditionally published does not mean that you are going to be a bestseller, and likewise for indie publishing as well. In fact, most indie publishers never recoup the cost of publication. I still have not recouped all of the costs of The Mark of Amuline. That was my very first book. So, and most debut authors never make back what a publisher invests in it, including, the author advance that they get. Unless you're insanely lucky, you're not going to be making enough royalties from your book to live off of for a while or ever. So, that's the harsh reality of the industry. For every E.L. James breakout story, there are hundreds of thousands of authors that remain undiscovered. So keep that in mind. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of investing in yourself, and it takes some luck. It takes some luck to get there too. So if you decide to go the indie route, the best you can do for yourself and your books is to invest in making that book the best it can be. So if you're going the traditional route, write the best story that you can come up with the most engaging and unforgettable characters. Yeah, there's a lot of luck, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of luck involved in the process, but in order for a lucky break to happen, someone with influence needs to actually read and like the book that you're writing, which means that you have to have some skill. You have to have, it's not always about the luck. Oh, she's such a terrible writer, or he's such a terrible writer, but he just happened to luck out. There's always a bit of skill in there, and even the books that you may think aren't that good, the writer obviously had enough skill to keep people enthralled and to keep people reading the story. So, just because it might not be a book for you doesn't mean that the author is a bad writer. As much as I don't like E.L. James's, 50 Shades of Grey, it doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that it's a bad book. It is a certain type of book for a certain type of reader. I'm not that reader. She's made a lot of money and she's been very successful. So, you gotta put that into perspective, and you've got to give respect where respect is due. With that said, what path will I ultimately end up taking in the future? And I've been asked this a couple of times, will I eventually start querying my books, or will I remain in the self-publishing route? And the truth is I kind of want to go hybrid with this. The next book that I write, I'm going to keep the manuscript within the guidelines of traditional publishing queries. So because I'd like to try it out. I want to actually get experience in the traditional publishing space. I want to see if what I'm writing is marketable, if I'm able to actually get into the traditionally published space with my current skill, with the current skill that I'm at. So that's why I'll still, my self-published books are going to take priority over everything. I'm going to be getting, the next books of the Mark Famuli out, the next books of Varcross, probably get When Life Gives You Werewolves published, either in VN form or actually in book form, or I may do both. There's still a lot that I have to do with my self-publishing business, because that is taking off and there's a lot of momentum there, and I need to keep up with that. I need to stay with it. But at the same time, I don't want to completely ignore the traditional publishing route either. And there are pros to both of them. There are, and right now I'm reaping the benefits of self-publishing. Like, things are starting to really take off. Things are starting to really improve with the books. So I'm not going to just ignore all that, drop it, and then go to self-pub or to go to traditional publishing. It's just not gonna happen that way, because traditional publishing, like I said, takes a lot of time. I've got to not only query to a bunch of agents. There's a whole process with that as well. That could take months to do. Then there's also, if it does get bought, or if it does get represented by an agent, that agent has still got to sell it to an editor, so or an imprint or something. Somewhere within the traditional publishing route, whether it's a part of the Big Four, or even maybe a smaller publishing company, or maybe a smaller imprint. So all of those, ultimately the agent will know which path is best for the story, which is another reason to have a literary agent, which is why they're so good to have in the traditional publishing sphere. So hopefully this video was at least a little informative, especially if you're thinking of trying to become an author. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't really matter what path you take. If you want your book to sell, it's going to take the same amount of work, roughly the same amount of work. It's just a different way of doing things, but you're still going to be doing a lot of work to get your book in a sellable state. So if you want to suggest more content, I'm always up for new ideas in my Patreon Discord. If you want to check out my new book, like I said, it's the Varcross Key. I'll put a link in the description below. I really don't have a catchy end phrase yet, so I'll catch you later.